So, with all the AI noise happening right now, how do you guys evaluate which use case are worth piloting versus what it's only for experimenting?
Two perspectives. Perspective number one, find real problems or opportunities in the bank, right? What are things that we're struggling with where AI can solve an existing problem? What are opportunities that we like to capture but we're unable to, and AI would allow us to capture those? The second part is just do cool stuff for the sake of doing cool stuff, because being at the forefront, frontier models, testing these things might unlock completely radically new ways of looking at a potential problem or a potential opportunity. And I think if you don't do both in parallel, you get stuck.
With the development of AI tools and the AI platforms, the opportunities that we have seem to be growing overnight almost. It's generally exhausting. I would say focus short term, keep an eye on the long term, but don't get distracted. I feel like it's so easy to get distracted by the better models or smarter POC or chasing perfection. You learn as you experiment. You learn as you do stuff.
Welcome to the Success Revenue Podcast, where AI meets leadership and real business impact, from the Middle East to the world. This is the show for leaders navigating how AI is unlocking human impact and reshaping how businesses grow.
We are your hosts, Ivy Ferrero, executive leader and speaker, and Haider Al-Saad, CEO of Nebulous, where businesses build and deploy AI agents. Join us for another conversation on this episode. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Success Revenue Podcast. We are extremely excited to get started with today's guest. Before we do, just a quick reminder, we again appreciate everyone listening into our episodes. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us, whether that's on YouTube, where you get your favorite podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and beyond. We truly appreciate that. But let's delve right into today's episode, where we have actually not one, but as you guys can see and hear very soon here, two fantastic guests with us today. Giovanni Everduin and Ihab Ahmed are joining us for today's conversation. We'll start with Giovanni. A quick introduction to you. Gio serves as a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at CBI, where he oversees several different areas such as corporate strategy, innovation, and banking as a service. In 2025, he also co-founded CBIx, the bank's independent innovation lab and corporate VC arm. A Harvard Business School alumnus, Gio also combines experience and expertise in finance, technology, and strategy to bridge emerging technologies with real-world financial applications. And we also have Ihab with us today, who's a brand and innovation leader known for shaping some of the absolute best and most prominent brands in the region, and recognized as someone that's driven real award-winning customer experience for those brands. As head of impact and founding member of CBIx, it also drives the lab's efforts to build ecosystems, forge partnerships, and translate disrupted ideas into real-world value. Ihab also plays a key role in ensuring CBIx doesn't just explore the future of banking and beyond, but also makes it resonate with businesses, communities, and individuals. Guys, welcome to the show. Very excited for today's conversation.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we jump right in? Again, we've got two of you guys here today. There's a ton that we want to cover. And why don't we start off kind of easy, Gio, and you can decide who starts. But walk us through your kind of, quickly around your background, where you're currently based, kind of what took you to where you are today. Let's start there.
Ladies first.
I was going to say you can go first, but okay. Well,
Age before beauty.
Fair enough. Okay, so my name's Ihab, born and raised in Dubai, pretty much been in tech startups my entire life. 15 plus years in tech startups, had an agency at some point in time, and now banking. So through tech startups such as Kareem, Taster, and the likes, I've always worked on brands, communities, establishing voices to all of these brands and making them stand out amongst their peers. The move into financial innovation, let's say, wasn't easy. It was definitely a different and interesting one. But I think there's a lot of my background that could be of great use, which is why I'm now with you.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I didn't even know you had an agency. We need to talk about that at some point. We'll get back to that. So, yeah, my name is Gio. Hey, everyone. I am Caribbean Dutch, grew up in the Netherlands, came to Dubai in about 2011, so coming up to 15 years now. Started as a consultant, political analyst, and then kind of like always found myself in kind of strategy, policy, change, transformation, and it's kind of rolled into innovation. Bit of a reluctant banker, never really saw a career in banking for myself. However, here we are and have a lot of interest outside of banking in emerging technology, whether it's AI or, crypto, Web3, holographics, or anything really new. I think I consider myself like obsessively curious, which is kind of like a good thing in the role that I have. But it also makes me sometimes a very annoying person, I guess, to deal with for people in the bank and anyone who's not necessarily as enthusiastic about ushering in, a world of innovation.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, guys. And piggybacking off of that, the role of innovation. I know you guys have roles within the main bank with CBI, but tell us you can tell us about that as well. But tell us also a bit more about your current roles at CBIx. What's your mandate, and how has that kind of evolved to where it is today, where you're trying to do moving into the future in those roles?
Let me cover CBIX maybe first, and then Ihab can talk a little bit more specifically around what we're doing on the ground and what we're planning. But the genesis of it really came down to when you try to do innovation in a bank, right? A highly regulated banks are generally highly regulated. We're listed. It's very difficult to do that, and it's difficult for a good reason, but it's difficult nonetheless, right? Because doing innovation under tight regulatory scrutiny, working with legacy systems, right? We still use mainframes and legacy mindsets for the most of it, right? Banks have been wired to think compliance and risk first, right? Controls first. And again, there's very valid reasons for all of that. However, it makes doing innovation very, very difficult. And so I like to say that in order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. Well, guess what? Breaking eggs in a bank is not usually something people really want you to do. And so where do you do it? Because we need to innovate, right? And things are changing. So CBIX is really the solution. It's a separate entity owned by the bank, an innovation lab, and a corporate VC. But first things first, an innovation lab where we can experiment, build use cases, test new things, get prototypes, and then we can kind of take it back to the bank as and when we've actually built something that we think is of value. We can move a lot faster. We operate like a startup. And you kind of circumvent some of the red tape just to get to a minimum viable product. And then you bring it back in the bank and you still go through all of the appropriate governance and controls and everything that you need to. But at the very least, you have something very tangible to show, and you've been able to do some things much faster than anyone else. I don't know, Ihab, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. Going back to the question of, how we got here, I would say for me, I worked with Gio in the strategy department. I was focusing on customer experiences and leading kind of how the bank evolves that customer experience. But we realized there's more to that than just the execution of the projects that I had on my plate. And that's kind of also where at the same time where CBIX turned into a reality. So under CBIX, I'm heading Impact, a new kind of role, I would say, as an evolution of the brand marketing kind of names that you would typically see. So I'm responsible for the brand as well, the ecosystem, partnerships, some of the pilots, POCs, events, building a community around everything we're doing. And strategically, my role is about amplifying the impact of everything that we do and ensuring that we try to reach the right audiences through the different channels that we use to communicate. So think of it as marketing multiplied.
Wow.
Very cool.
Incredible.
That's a nice lead into the X. You should explain the X since you said it. Like, talk about that.
Well, true. So the X in CBIX is basically the multiplier effect or the amplification effect. We multiply opportunity. We amplify opportunities. It could also be the crossroads between innovation and the traditional, our partners and the bank, and so on. So it amplifies. It's the crossroads. It's the to the power of, where we can take an idea, scale it, amplify it, make it a lot bigger than initially we could think about. So the placement of the X is very purposeful, and it's all encompassing just the ability that we wish CBIX to have to empower, amplify, multiply opportunities.
Very cool.
Well, I love this. Sounds like a dynamic duo. It sounds like you guys really complement each other. So I love that. Gio, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your background. I know you went from your first real job being part of a political campaign in Mexico to working in the US, Europe, and now in the Middle East, advising governments and beyond. What is one thing you learned early during all of the different facets that you've had in your career that you would say still holds true?
You got to trust your intuition, right? Like I've never really planned a lot of things. My career is far from linear. If you were to, you kind of talked about it a little bit. It's far from linear and it's fine. Like I've learned early on to trust my intuition. If something doesn't feel right, if you get a spidey sense, then you act on that, right? I don't know what it is. You can consider spirituality, you can consider many different things. But if there's something there that tells you to either not do something or do something, I've learned to kind of like listen to that voice, and I've also learned to isolate the signal from the noise within that. So that's what I do. I always trust my intuition, and ultimately, I feel like my body or whatever is able to perceive things before I'm logically or rationally able to perceive it, right? And so that's my biggest takeaway. That and be true to yourself. Just be who you are. Honestly, it's so incredibly tiring to try and be something you're not. Most people do not care as much about you or think as much about you as you think they do, right? And so trying to live into what you perceive to be an image that other people want you to have, honestly, is just really, really silly. So if you're still young, like forget about it. Just do you, do you, much easier.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I agree everything about that you said about the intuition. I think sometimes some things don't make sense logically, and to other people, whether it's our family or friends, some career pivots don't make sense. But I feel like at the end of the day, if you have that urge in your heart, you should definitely go for it. So Steve Jobs took this calligraphy class in college, which had nothing to do with anything academically that he needed to take for that college year. And then eventually, when he went on to found Apple, that same class that he has taken helped him to come up with different fonts that would come to make the product of Apple so unique. So it's so beautiful to be able to connect the dots, and you can only do that by working backwards after you have taken the decision of leaping into your heart. And one of the things that you guys both talk about a lot is about escaping legacy gravity. And I wanted to kind of ask you guys, how do you decide what rules to break versus what constraints to honor when building within a traditional bank system? Ihab, do you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start off by saying to all the bank employees listening, we never break the rules.
Ever.
But what I would like to say is I think the rules are kind of like a rubber band. There's always a little stretch. I think the bigger question for me is before I do anything is the intention behind what I'm trying to do potentially a genuine service of the organization? If yes, I would like to stretch it a little bit. If not, then I would honor the constraint. At the end of the day, it really is important because if you pull it too far, it will snap, right? Gio?
Yeah, I think, if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Jack Sparrow has this saying, the rules, it's more like guidelines, Savi. And so I think the way we look at it is, if you're going to do an innovation lab and if you're going to use experimentation as a key strategic enabler, right? You can't consider rules. That's the whole point, right? You go first principles and build stuff. That's the reason why we have an isolated entity. Consider it like almost like if you were to create this like underground bunker where no one can see or hear what you're doing, and you can just do all kinds of crazy stuff until you figure out something that actually works. And then, right, what you do, you slowly reintroduce those rules to make sure that it still works, because this is really important. Many ideas are amazing, but when you place them back into the context of a bank being regulated, working with customers and everything else, there are very valid reasons why you can't do it the way you want to do it. But our job is to kind of figure out those extreme cases and then work them backwards. And you said working backwards, right? Steve Jobs, Amazon, work backwards and build a product that kind of fits within that constraints. But my mind is you have to go extreme first to end up at something good. Because if you start with the rules, you're just doing the same thing that the bank was already doing. And then you could arguably say, what's the value in that? So our job is to boldly envision something fundamentally different, right? Disruptive, and then work backwards, because we're not here to be completely disruptive, work backwards at the rules one by one and figure out how can we now make this work within the context, which means we're not shooting for the stars, but we're trying to get, away from the gravity far enough that we can make some meaningful traction.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think also in the context of the finance industry, or you go to other regulated industries, healthcare, insurance, whatever it might be, there is also a level of tiers in terms of what is regulations and rules and compliance versus what is old school kind of norms and practices that are institutionally there within the organization or within that particular company. I think that's somewhere where some of the regulations, they're not breakable. They need to be, at the end of it, when you work your way back, need to be adhered to. But there's maybe getting away from that institutional structure that is not permitting you really to have that innovation in place.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it, right?
And if I can say one more thing, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to plug one of our competitors, but I think it's important because the role they play in the market is super important in terms of opening up innovation. I'm talking about Wio. Usually what happens is if everyone is doing something in a certain way, and if everyone has a perception that there's a certain risk or a certain reason why you can't do it differently, it's very difficult, right? Because no one wants to be the first and take the risk. I think there's other banks that did something, but when Wio particularly came in and we built, onboarding, right, which is, let's say, opening an account or becoming a customer with them, first principles, which, by the way, is nothing exclusively like disruptive. That has been done by many other parties all over the world, Revolut included. But they did it here in this market as a fully licensed bank. And all of a sudden, it's like everyone else is like, oh, wait, whoa, you can just do that digitally? We don't need papers, right? We don't need wet signatures, because now you have someone who's operating live under the governance of the central bank, proving to everyone that this can be done, right? And now everyone is kind of like, oh, let's also do that. And so these things are really important. You need little catalysts and examples where boards and management teams feel comfortable to say, okay, so I've seen something. I'm not being the first to do something and break eggs. Actually, this is a fully appropriate and governed way to do something. So now I can also do that. And I think, big thanks to Wio, shout out to their team, particularly whoever built the products, because that's an amazing product. But more importantly, it showed a path to all of us that this can be done.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely need those trailblazers within the space that again shows the way. And I guess that's what you're also trying to do with CBIx, is to find the next iteration and generation of these things, which is super cool. And if we stick a little bit on the the technology front here, as we're brushing into that a little bit, as someone that, let's call it, my day job with Nebulous is AI and working with very regulated industries in particular and embedding AI. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, both of you guys, when you're looking at kind of embedding AI into organizations with this kind of deeply rooted structure systems, legacy systems, and also this culture restraint that we talked about, right? That is there and in place. How do you guys approach AI and some of these emerging technologies and implementing that into and embedding that into your systems as you're trialing and erroring and testing different things to get that to actually to production?
I think Ihab has some war stories on that one.
Yeah,
I'm leaving that one for you, Gio.
love to hear from both of you on it from different perspectives.
I mean, look, it's the simple answer is it is incredibly hard. That's it. It's incredibly hard. And for all the reasons that you mentioned earlier, first and foremost, I don't necessarily think people play around with AI as much as I think they probably should, to kind of get a sense of what the technology can do, but also what it cannot do, right? Because there's limitations to it too. And it's hard to envision a new way of doing things if you haven't played around with it. And so my advice to CEOs and boards and leadership teams is always like, get your hands dirty, right? Play around with it and get a sense of it. Because I don't know how you're going to lead a digital transformation if you're not digitally savvy or digitally native, or at the very least, digitally curious, right? Base level of capability yourself. But the truth is it's hard, and it's hard for two reasons, right? One is the systems, infrastructure, and the second one, often forgotten and not that sexy, data. Right? Everyone wants to build their own LLM, and you can argue to say why, but let's assume that that's the right thing to do for an argument. But then if you don't have the right data, if your data is not complete, if the quality of the data is not good, if it's in disparate sources and you have levels of governance and ownership, it becomes very, very complicated. Like A lot of people, a lot of governments talk about e-gov, right? And AI-powered government. In order to do that, you first have to fix the data layer. And the countries that have done that really, really well, shout out to Kazakhstan, they have spent years building a massive data lake, connecting all the different government entities and bodies and private sector data sources into one massive data lake. Now, once you have that, plugging in AI on top to get value out of it is significantly easier, but it starts with a lot of unsexy work. And the truth is, unfortunately, boards will gladly give you a budget to buy a shiny tool, but very few will give you a significant budget in terms of manpower and capex to fix the data, right? But that's a core requirement. So I think that's my take on it. It's very, very difficult. I know Ihab is playing around a lot with AI too, so I'll let him answer like what his take is in terms of how do you implement that in the organization. And you should cover two angles. CBIx, because it's a lot easier for you there, and the bank.
Harder there, yeah.
Well, I'll start with the CBIx part, which is a lot easier, let's say. Obviously, we are a subsidiary of the bank, so we have to, of course, play nice and follow the rules. But because we don't have the systems, the firewalls, the data protections things in place yet, at least, it allows us to experiment more and play around with it. So for me, for example, focusing on brand, I use AI for literally every single thing that I do today. It just makes my time a lot more efficient. I can explore other areas of being more creative. I can guide and control the outputs that I expect from AI tools, and it just makes my life so much easier and faster. And to be honest, the output might, dare I say it, be better. If you ever had to work with a designer and the back and forth and feedback sessions and request forms and all of those kind of things, you realize a prompt is a lot easier. But aside from just the brand stuff, I mean, working on agents, I think we have a couple of pilots in place. I'm not sure if we're going to share all of them, but essentially what we're looking at is analyzing partnerships, analyzing opportunities coming through investments, analyzing data sets and understanding, is there an underlying value for us to invest in or to partner with or to explore further, analyzing what's happening out there in the market today. It's a lot of tools that I'm putting in place where it'll just get me all the snippets that I need in the morning so that I don't have to go through a couple of hours of Twitter or Reddit in the morning. So there's a lot that we're playing around with and doing with CBIx, and I think AI is pretty much embedded in the majority of what we're doing. Now, when it comes to the bank, it gets a bit more complicated. We can't have AI tools that are connected to the internet, which is 99.99% of the tools. So there's a lot of limitations there. Now, we are exploring ways of being able to have a closed loop LLM or something internally that can allow us to analyze our data, understand our data, throw questions at our own data, and hopefully not have any external bias. So just a couple of snippets.
And I think the other thing to say is that, so one thing that's important, the reason why we kind of segregated CBIx in the DIFC, right? Because it's a DIFC entity, and is because it doesn't hold any customer data, right? One of the biggest sensitivities in banks, and rightfully so, just like in the medical, is sensitivities around customer data. We're not touching any customer data. We don't have any confidential bank data. In fact, we have no data, if you think about it. We're an innovation lab, right? So the way we use these tools is generatively. It is not necessarily to analyze existing data where there would be any sensitivity around it. But when you go into the bank, it's a whole different story. And yeah, you do need enterprise-grade tools and guardrails and provisioning and risk assessments in order to do that right. That takes more time. It can be done, and we're working on things, but it just genuinely takes more time because there are more risks, right? And we need to ensure that there's no leaks. I think the other day there was, I'm not going to name it, but it was a big event, a big conference that had a leak, right? A data leak. These are some of the things that in banks, you can't have that. It's not, there's a tolerance, it's zero sum, right? Zero. And so in that sense, on the CBIx side, we can be a little bit more, we can play around with these things because we don't have that risk. At the same time, we still need to be careful, right? Because whatever we upload, whatever, what is considered information that is critical to our business, revenue, like we can't do that either. So you're somewhat constrained. By the way, I think this is going to change. I think in the next 12 to 18 months, these tools will become embedded in any organization. And I'm not talking about the kind of Me Too flip a switch that you get for free with your enterprise provider. I'm talking actual enterprise grade tooling. It will become so normal. But for the time being, it's still, I think, a bit of a slow process.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And yeah, we definitely see it a lot. And it's interesting in these highly regulated industries, just the requirement for governance, on-premise, label deployments, the different things that you need to adhere to, like you said, stay within the systems of the bank. So you don't have that external risk coming through. Combine that with different models and trying to make it all fit together. That's a lot of times where that challenge comes into play. All right, perfect. And I wanted to maybe just also take one more step a little bit, Gio, because you spoke a bit about governments that are doing this well. You mentioned Kazakhstan. In your intro, you talked about some of the different things that you've done in crypto and so on. So I was wondering, as you've moved around working with governments, crypto startups, obviously commercial banking now, what are some of the threads that you feel kind of ties all this together for you across these different experiences that you've had?
I'll tell you the trends that I see and how my worlds are converging, which is AI is becoming more mainstream. I think at the current moment, AI can do a lot more than most people think it can, and it can do a lot less than people say it can on the timeline. And let's say timeline on Twitter, LinkedIn, right? So don't forget, people there are amplifying a message. They're selling an exaggerated view of the future, and OpenClaw is a great example of that. Pretty awesome. Significant limitations, right? If you were to believe what people are writing on LinkedIn, you think like it can automate your life. It cannot, but it can do a lot of really interesting, cool stuff, which for many people blow their minds in terms of that's now possible to do that at a $20 subscription model and a little bit of configuration of, let's say Mac Mini if you want to go down that route. But AI will become far more mainstream. That's number one. There's no more escaping. It's there. Everyone is investing significantly into it. The second thing is, for me, agentic AI will be super interesting. A lot of the agentic stuff that you see in the market these days is far from agentic. But I think, again, that's a process, it's a maturization. And so over time, you get a lot more truly agentic, autonomous agents that can do things. Now, that converges very quickly with my crypto world, because for an agent to be truly agentic, let's say if you want to do travel booking as an example, now the agent will need a wallet, right? A wallet that is ideally custodial and where you can put some guardrails. So what better than to combine an AI agent with programmable smart money, e.g. stables, right? And so you start seeing how all these pieces start converging over time. And I see that now there's a lot more appetite for people to look at, okay, well, what does this really mean? Like, forget the technology. What does this mean for society? How are we going to look at work, organizational structure, teams, management, right? Like, you got to at some point start rethinking it. The other day, I was talking to a couple of friends of mine, and some of them are like pretty nerdy PhD Stanford AI guys. And it's like, well, at what point do we need to start thinking about AI rights in the same context as human rights? Right? When you approach AGI or something that you could arguably say resembles a consciousness of sorts, right? Or agency, at what point do you need to start thinking about giving certain protections to how these, systems are being used and potentially exploited? So I think it's fascinating. I think we're in a brave new world. I have no idea. Anyone who tells you that in the next 3 years, I don't think anyone really knows. And I'm the first to throw up my hand. I have no idea what's going to happen, but it'll definitely be super exciting.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you, Gio. And I don't know if you guys saw the article that recently was posted on X by this like AI founder and investor, Matt Schumer. And in this article, he's basically talking about how fast AI has actually become more intelligent or more capable over the past few years. And what I find very interesting about the current era that we're going through is not necessarily seeing AI as, with the lens of like fear, but actually the opportunity that is in front of us, because now anybody can launch it. If you ever wanted to write a book, like there's absolutely no excuses to go for it now as an entrepreneur if you ever wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? And I feel like the real edge isn't just using AI, but it's also being early enough to understand it before the adoption wave actually hits. And this is information asymmetry, which is like essentially the gap between those who are experimenting seriously, like probably us, and those casually observing it and resisting AI. So I find that to be very, very exciting. In this article, he was also saying that this is probably the most important year of our careers not because, everything is collapsing, but because adaptability and being able to open up our hearts and our minds to welcome this technology and get curious, which is, I feel like curiosity and adaptability are two of the most valuable skills right now in any room. So I find that to be very interesting. And Ihab, so let's now go on to you. You have built some of the region's most loved brands, like Kareem, which I use on a daily basis multiple times. I don't even go to the grocery stores. What's the biggest shift in your thinking since moving into financial innovation?
Well, first of all, thank you for being a customer. Yeah, same here. My life is pretty much, it revolves around Kareem for pretty much everything. And I'm glad that is the case. It's really exciting when sometimes you forget about the brand that you were a part of, and then you'd be driving around the street and then look around and you see like Kareem bikes everywhere and you go like, interesting. We built that. That was a part of our legacy, let's say. Speaking of Steve Jobs, you mentioned him at some point in time, and I remembered there was this quote that he was actually challenged in one, let's say, session. I can't remember where it was, about what he was doing because he was terminating his contract with some sort of programming language or something of that sort. But the biggest point was his response, which was saying, you start with the customer experience and you work backwards to the technology, right? And when I look back at the brands such as Kareem, Taster, and many of the brands that were built around that era, so you're talking about a decade ago, the brands existed because of the purpose. And the product was built around the people that wanted the actual product, right? So they define who they are, what are they trying to achieve, they really understand what the customers want, and then they go out and build it. And then they end up being multi-billion-dollar companies. Banks, in my view, work the other way around, right? The products are decided, the rates are set, the processes are imposed, and the customers have to adapt. And that's a fundamentally different way of branding when you have to position that. And I think it's really difficult to bring out a personality, build a community, engage with an audience when you have that kind of dynamic. It is very, very difficult. And I think that's probably why it's changing right now. You see the neobanks, you see the digital banks, you see the big international brands like Revolut coming in with their big personalities and their top-notch kind of style of communicating. And it's really hard to take them on.
I was going to say that I think fintech, as an industry, really evolved from this notion of banks not fulfilling that gap, right? If you think about what fintechs really do, is they became like shortcuts to innovation that customers wanted, but banks were, for many different reasons, unable to fulfill at the pace that it was expected. Um, and one of the things we want to do differently in CBIx is exactly just that. Like, we're working on a couple of products for the bank, right? Let's call it incubating, testing some products. And one of the things is, built with the community. So we involve our potential customer bases early, do a focus group, get inputs, and actually build a product that people want. And then kind of do the Steve Jobs thing where you extrapolate a little bit and go like, well, A is what you want and B is your latent needs. I'm going to fulfill those too. But at the core, it has to start with something that people genuinely want, right? Because doing another product that everyone else in the market is doing is not going to help us. But making a fundamentally, radically different product that nobody wants is also not going to help you, right? And so we start with our customers and understand their needs, their context, understand their wants, and then we kind of think through, like, both based on those wants, based on your context, based on your needs. Here's actually what we think would be a great product that solves your problems or addresses your needs. And obviously, let's be clear, makes money for the bank, because at the end of the day, we are a for-profit organization. We're not just experimenting for the sake of experimentation, but we want to combine both, right? Great customer experience, but also highly profitable. And obviously, low risk, no risk, low risk, no risk.
I love that. That's great. Great customer success. Let's jump back into AI. So with all the AI noise happening right now, how do you guys evaluate which use case are worth piloting versus what it's only for experimenting?
I mean, that's a tough question. I'll tell you why. Like, there's so much happening, right? So fast that if you really wanted to build a structure for that, I think your structure would be obsolete in after day one. But I think it's probably a healthy combination, though I don't know where we draw the line. Maybe Ihab knows, but it's a healthy combination of two perspectives. Perspective number one: find real problems or opportunities in the bank. Right? What are things that we're struggling with where AI can solve an existing problem, or what are opportunities that we like to capture but we unable to, and AI would allow us to capture those. That's one, right? So link it to the business strategy and the existing business operating. The second part is just do cool stuff for the sake of doing cool stuff, because being at the forefront, frontier models, testing these things might unlock completely radically new ways of looking at a potential problem or a potential opportunity. And I think if you don't do both in parallel, you get stuck. You can't do too much of the kind of just cool stuff, because then it's not going to be practical. You're not going to be able to do use cases, and then you get death by 1,000 POCs, right? Innovation for innovation's sake, technology for technology's sake, that's not the solution. But if you stick too much on like finding specific problems to solve, I think you kind of limit yourself in the context of what we have today versus imagining a whole new world that could be fundamentally different. If I had to put percentages, and this is nowhere near set in stone, I'd probably say we want to do 70%, fixing existing problems, or, unlocking opportunities in the existing setup, and 30%, innovate or experimenting for the sake of experimenting, and then figuring out how we can use that. I don't know, Ihab, what do you think?
I think for me, the simplest way of saying my view is the noise is real. Like there's so many opportunities, and that seems with the development of AI tools and the AI platforms, the opportunities that we have seem to be growing overnight almost. It's genuinely exhausting. For me, the way I see it is the bar. I've set the bar probably quite low, but I would say, is there something that needs improving right now, and is there an AI tool or agent that could help do with that? I would say focus short term, keep an eye on the long term, but don't get distracted. I feel like it's so easy to get distracted by the better models or smarter POC or chasing perfection. I would say look at what are the short term issues that we can resolve right now, because also you learn as you experiment, you learn as you do stuff. You can sit online, especially if you're on Twitter, and you just keep scrolling endlessly, seeing someone generate. And I've done the same myself. I saw these videos of people, generating themselves as Avengers, and are able to do podcasts like we are today, but in Avengers. And I went down the rabbit hole of figuring out how to do all of that, only to realize I don't do podcasts. Why am I even wasting my time doing this? Right? And that's exactly the case. It's just so easy to fall down the rabbit hole. So I would say, look at your immediate surroundings, look at the main problems around you, and try to resolve for it today. It might not be the best model by the end of the week, but at least you experience, you tried, and hopefully you break some eggs.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, the reality is, so I saw latest McKinsey report, which, always take McKinsey stuff with a grain of salt, but somewhere like 95% of AI deployments fail. They get stuck sandbox in these environments where they're being tested, but they're not actually getting to production, creating real value for the organization, right? And I'm curious to hear you guys thoughts on that gap, right? Because that's really you can test a bunch of stuff, you can experiment. A lot of things are cool in sandbox. They work well enough on kind of specific use cases or in limited fashion. But when you start talking about the enterprise context, and especially in industries like banking, we mentioned healthcare, insurance, others before, real estate, etc., that's a pretty big chasm and gap to go from that to actually being in production and productive for the organization. How do you guys think about that gap? How do you bridge that gap and actually get it live versus just testing?
First of all, I think that 80, that 90, 95%, but I think 80 to 95% as a range, right, of failure, that applies to transformation, that applies to change. Because I've seen this come back, and McKinsey must have like a fixed number they just apply. But all jokes aside, and it applies to mergers and acquisitions. Most of these things tend to fail. Now, specifically on AI or any new technology, and what I call death by 1,000 POCs, I think it's a combination of two things. Number one, if it doesn't solve a real problem, if it doesn't give real value, no business is going to adopt it. As simple as that, right? No one, when you're running a business, you don't have the luxury of just doing stuff because it's cool and long term, it may potentially do something for you. You need something that solves a problem today that makes you more profitable today, less risky today, more efficient today, whatever that may be, more customer friendly today. That's number one, right? And so you got to start from the core of what the business needs. Now, the second thing is honestly, it's a misalignment of incentives very often. It's a great model to start with a center of excellence where you have like innovation somewhere separately coming up with stuff because it's the easiest model to do, right? But then the problem often is how do you embed it back into the business because there's no linkage and the incentives are misaligned. The incentives of the innovation team is to come up with innovation. The incentive of the business is to drive business. And unless you find a very logical link, often those two don't go hand in hand. On top of that, when you're driving revenue targets, you have a low risk appetite for changing things because it comes at a risk not just of not hitting incremental revenue, you might actually impact your existing business, distract people. Some people who don't like change might throw up a fuss. It has all kinds of consequences implementing new technologies. So most people prefer to just err on the side of let me just do the business the way I've always been doing it, and that way I can just deliver, not get fired, get a good bonus, right? And so I think that's usually a big part of it. And then the last thing I'll say is it has to come from the top. There has to be an absolute, unequivocal, clear mandate that we want to do these things. Because if you don't, no one will. If given the choice, people prefer to keep things the same. Most people, right? And so unless there's a clear mandate that says we need to embrace these things, find use cases, the truth is it will just die as a really cool POC, or worse, not worse, worse as in it will die as a really cool POC, and then 1.5 years later your competitor does it, and you're like, we had that a year and a half ago, ready to go, we didn't do it. And that happens to us a couple of times. And then I see my competitor and they go out and do it. And the same people who killed the idea back then go like, oh, why are we not doing it? You know what I mean? Like that is the paradox of innovation.
Yeah, no, definitely the case. And I think it's so interesting because what we seen as far as sales when we do this, the biggest flip factor I almost because you did technology and all these different things, use cases, but the two biggest, at least for me, that I've seen in all of our projects and we work with customers, flipping factors between success and failure. One is involving the business users in the process of, let's say, developing the agents or the logic around it, because otherwise you get into this, an engineer is sitting there for 3 months building something, they get to sandbox, the business comes in and says, well, this doesn't make sense, the quality is not good, it's not doing it like I would do it or the logic, and now you're spending another 3 months trying to fix that and now everything's obsolete. So the ability to involve that business user early on in the use case that pertains to them, I think is really important. And then the second thing is what you said, Gio, about people don't really enjoy getting out of their existing routines or systems or the way that they're doing things. So adding another UI, adding another place to go to do things typically increases the failure rate versus embedding this into their existing systems, workflows, processes more naturally. But those things we've seen a ton helping. So I think really good points that you bring up there in terms of the failure success divergence there, Gio. Now I want to ask you about CBIx's brand. Maybe we talked about Apple a lot during this podcast unintentionally, but I was just, as we were speaking about these different things, I was reminded about an old kind of example with Nokia, which for us old people remember Nokia was really big with phones back in the day. They had some good ones, some 20 plus years ago. And they're doing really well. They were coming out with their new phone, and they did all these focus groups, test groups to make sure like all the features, the things with the new phone was what people wanted. And it scored really, really high. So they were happy with it. They went to market, the phone tanked. And the reason why it tanked is because the iPhone came out at the same time. So they went back to the focus groups to kind of evaluate like what went wrong. You guys, scored all this really high. You want this, and there's many focus groups, right? And people just simply said, "Well, I didn't know that I wanted the iPhone. I didn't know that that was even an option. The smartphone, all those features, those capabilities." So the consumer kind of thought they knew what they wanted based off what was already there, but what they actually wanted, what came out of that innovation from Apple at that time. Which I think is a really nice example. So tying that back into our conversation, Ihab, you're kind of the sole or the key custodian of the CBIx brand from zero inception to kind of launch and where it's going right now. What is the most kind of non-obvious decision you made that made the brand feel alive or exciting versus just maybe a polished version of the CBI brand itself?
So I think first I'll talk about what other people have been doing. If you look at the space, in the innovation space, you see a lot of people who double down on the aspirations, the announcements, signing ceremonies, the vision statements. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is all of that is just far too aspirational for us. We are very real on ground people doing real on ground things. And I think one of the things that we've decided, or at least I've decided to take as an approach for how we present ourselves, is not to talk about others' speeches or other talk. I want to only be real and true. So if you look at everything that we've been publishing, everything we're pushing out, it's all of the things that we've actually done. All of the events we've been to, all of the meetings we've had, the projects we've worked on, the focus groups we've initiated, ceremonies we've attended, everything that you see CBIx talk about or present itself with is a reality of what we've done. Of course, there are some aspirational stuff that pop up from time to time, but I think a key differentiator for us is being real and showcasing what we're doing as opposed to just talking about what we aspire to do.
Love that. Love that. One of the questions that I always like to ask is regarding, for anybody that might be listening to us, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's innovation minded but stuck in a slow moving organization?
Get a thick skin. Like it's not gonna get easier. No matter what you think is gonna get worse. And there's a reason for that. That is the opportunity, right? If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. If it was easy, there wouldn't be no need for people to be catalysts and no opportunity for people to be catalysts. But the truth is, it is not easy. People like their comfort zone, Hader, like we talked about. People don't want to change, right? Most people don't want to. Most people, I think, don't necessarily have that intellectual curiosity to kind of go out and learn what's out there and test it and try it. And again, like people are tired, they have busy lives and families and everything else. So the opportunity is there for those who want it, but it's not an easy ride. I usually explain it to people like if you play video games like I do, Call of Duty as an example, you have a zombie mode extraction, right? You get parachuted in and there's like hordes of zombies coming at you and you just kind of like have to survive. And then every time you survive a wave, another wave comes and then that's really what it feels like doing innovation in any kind of like conservative or traditional organization. Any even more so when it's regulated, but genuinely speaking. So unless you have the stomach for that, it's going to be really tough. And you need to know that. Don't romanticize it. Just like don't romanticize being a founder or an entrepreneur. It is tough. It can be lonely, but it's very, very rewarding. And so I think that's usually what I would tell people. Ivy, you talked about information asymmetry. I think that is the key thing. And because of that, people will not see what you see. They will not be able to imagine what you can imagine. So you will speak to them for things that are so obvious to you, and you will struggle because for other people, they are absolutely not obvious. It's as if you're speaking fundamentally different languages, right? So resilience is key. If you really want to do this, get resilient, keep your conviction, and find ways to re-energize because you're going to have to.
I would take a different approach. I mean, same, but in a different side. I would say the self-investment piece is very, very important. I mean, an example I'll give you is I was telling you earlier, actually, I was working on an Excel sheet. I was getting a bit big, a bit overwhelming. I'm pulling data from different sides, nothing to do with the bank, by the way. And I realized that, okay, is there a better way? And I had to explore that. Took me some time, and I ended up installing Claude on Excel. And boom, before you know it, I was literally telling it what I wanted it to do. And it was able to, master my entire sheet. And that's kind of what I would say to someone in that space. If they're innovation minded and they're stuck, I would say on a personal level, look at what you do and try to find, is there a way that you could do it better? Whether if it's personal or if you can adapt it at work or not, just try to understand what is out there. Because going back to my previous point about experience, if you don't try and test and figure stuff out, you're just not going to know. You're just not going to know. And it's going to get worse for you. It's pretty much in that state right now of doing math manually and someone is handing you a calculator. It's one of those situations all over again. You can either grab the calculator and figure out how to use it or pull out the whiteboard.
Maybe to add to that, I think it's a really important part, right? Like the reason Ihab can come up with new ways of doing things is because in his personal life, he's finding these things and then thinking about how can I translate that into the bank. And I think when you use these tools, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT or Malus or whatever you may want to use, Perplexity, ask it why, right? Don't just ask it like, how do I go from A to B, or because that's what many people do, but ask it why. Explain to me your reasoning. Why, tell me which options you considered and tell me which option you picked and why did you do that. And the reason for that is that's how you learn, right? I guess the whole point. Don't just outsource the decision making and the thinking, amplify the decision making and thinking, which really means you need to understand how the algorithm got to where it needed to, because you should be able to adopt the same level of thinking. And also you should know, like say, if you found a way to do something, you should know why the other ways of doing something were not the most optimal ways of doing something. Because if you miss out on that, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Mm. I love that. All right. So I've got another question. I actually just thought about this question. How do you both balance external success with internal purpose?
I love how you think that we're successful, but we'll run with it. Uh, I'll give you a short answer. Like naturally, I'm not going to say whether I'm successful or not, but if people perceive me to be successful, I'll tell you this much. Without personal conviction, there is no geo. It's as simple as that. So everything you see in me is because of the conviction I have. And if that's success, then it's because of the conviction. And if it's a lack of success, it's equally because of that conviction. So for me, the two go hand in hand. I don't think you can be great or good or in anything you do unless you have a level of conviction in yourself, in the people around you, and in the mission, whatever your mission might be, right? Could be to change the world, could be to generate $1 million, could be to be a good provider, could be to be healthy, whatever that may be. But, at the core, I think that's what drives you, and that ultimately will result into success. Inshallah, hopefully, maybe, usually.
Ihab?
Yeah, I believe the same. I think fundamentally at the core, it's always about being true to yourself, true to your beliefs, true to what you're trying to achieve in your personal life. And whatever people perceive it doesn't really matter, I would say.
I love that. And actually, one of my words for this year is conviction. Because I agree with you guys that conviction is what allows you to go at it without seeing the proof. You don't need any validation. You just go for it. You put your blinders off and nothing else matters. And yeah, I feel like without that, you're just going to second guess yourself. You're going to have a plan B, but having conviction is so powerful. It's truly being in your personal power without actually seeing any sort of proof yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
that's beautifully put. It's a superpower. If you know how to tap into that, it's a superpower.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed all around. Great points, great advice. And we've already come to the end of our conversation, guys. We've just been rushing through it, and I just looked at the time here. So many amazing insights and things. But what we do like to do as we kind of wrap up these conversations is to end on what we call a lightning round with a few quick questions and answers from us to you guys. And I'll go ahead and start us off, and then we'll just kind of go Ihab, Geo on each of the questions to make it easy. You guys ready for that?
Let's go.
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
All right, perfect. Won't be anything too hard, I promise. All right, so we'll kick off here with a simple one, maybe. The first question: the biggest opportunity with AI right now is?
Having access to an enormous amount of data that you could never have got through by yourself.
Nice, Geo.
Amplified learning.
Excellent. The biggest risk with AI right now is?
Not using it.
Amplified learning.
Excellent. I like that. Awesome. All right, next one here. So let's pretend that we managed to build the time machine. We fast forwarded 12 months into the future. So we're sitting here 1 year from now, and you're looking back at this past year at that point. What would you like the big headline of the year to be for you?
I would say for CBIx to be called as a 20-person team of 5.
That's a tough question. 12 months from now, looking back, Giovanni Ihab were right all along.
Love it. Love it.
Love it. I love the energy of you too. Okay, so Ihab, what is one thing that you're grateful for right now?
In the space or in life or
Yeah, in life, in general.
I think the opportunity of being as, how do I put this, privileged as I am, especially with where we live, where we exist today, but also especially like it's going back to the topic of AI and this space, I would say we're at the beginning phase, which I think is very important. I wouldn't want to be starting off AI or learning about AI or using AI 3 to 5 years from now.
I think for the ability to do the things that I love and to be able to take care and spend as much time as I can with the people that I love.
I love that. It's beautiful. And Ihab, what's one word you want this year to be about?
Oof, if I could choose a word, it'll be calm because it's been noisy.
What about you, Gio?
One word. Yeah, I was going to pick something similar to Ihab, but peace. And you can take that in any way, shape, or form, right? The ninth peace that Donald Trump is going to negotiate for us, peace of mind. But genuinely, I would like there to be peace in my world, in my head too.
Beautiful, guys. So we have made it to the end of this episode. I can't believe it. We made it to 1 hour, under an hour. I thought it was going to take much longer, but it has been incredible. Both of you guys have been incredible, and I know our audiences are going to love the conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much
for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Have a great weekend. Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem, everyone.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Success Revenue Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, and also give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts to support the show.